is William Morrow and I'm a teacher and teacher trainer here at International House London. This is just a short video to say hello and how happy we are to be working with you to create this new series of short videos on current trends. Within this series, we'll be looking at a range of topics. We'll be looking at language and skills, we'll be looking at different approaches, and we'll also be looking at different techniques and materials. Within the language and skills topic, we'll be looking at pronunciation techniques for large classes. We'll be looking at making reading more fun and interactive, how to evaluate a student's speaking, and using critical thinking in the classroom. For approaches, the videos will cover things like memorization and recall tasks. We'll be looking at using situational presentations, and we'll also be looking at using dialogues and grammar in tasks. And then finally, with the techniques and materials, we'll be looking at gamification, we'll be looking at using and exploiting dialogues, and we'll also be looking at correction techniques that you can use in your classroom. Okay, so thank you again. We really hope you enjoy the videos.
Hi, my name is Michael Turner and I'm a teacher and teacher trainer here at International House London. I'm really excited to be leading this session with you today, and the focus is on providing our learners with corrective feedback on their spoken English. So in this video, our focus is on why a teacher might provide learners with corrective feedback. We'll look at ways that this helps the learning process and helps learners acquire language. We'll explore some practical techniques in how to provide a range of corrective feedback, and we'll also look at ways we can gamify that feedback and make the error seem less serious and more fun. So to begin with, let's briefly consider why a teacher might decide that they don't want to give a learner feedback on their language.
A common worry among some teachers is that correcting a learner can somehow demotivate them, and that learners therefore do not want correction. But the good news is, surveys show time and time again that learners do in fact want correction, and many feel that they would benefit from more than they currently receive. We also know that it's not so much the correction itself that could potentially demotivate, rather the way that that correction is delivered. So as long as the teacher adopts a friendly, encouraging and supportive manner when delivering the correction, it's more likely to be successfully received by the learner. Some teachers remain unconvinced of the value of correction because they've tried it themselves and have not seen any noticeable improvement in their learners' English. But there are many studies showing better progress in groups that receive explicit correction when compared to those that don't. So it's a matter of the type of feedback you're giving your learner. And a third belief is that most errors can be attributed to the influence of the mother tongue. This is known as L1 interference. But take a moment to read this. So what are developmental errors, and how can correcting them help? In their excellent book on correction, Bartram and Walton clearly illustrate the process of language acquisition. We see that learners are exposed to language, and from this they form hypotheses about how the language works. Then they experiment with this language and receive feedback, which helps them adjust their ideas, and they try again, and this effort is received with more feedback. So this experiment, feedback loop is true of first and second language acquisition. The errors made when experimenting are therefore signs of learning, and carefully selected, sensitively delivered feedback will not damage the learner, but rather help them fine-tune their hypotheses and become better speakers of English.
So hopefully you found, like me, some of those arguments compelling, and you're now ready to reflect on the way that you provide corrective feedback, and also to learn some new techniques or revisit some old ones that perhaps you used to do but you've forgotten about or you haven't done for a while. Before we look at those techniques, let's consider first of all the kinds of error we might correct: global errors and local errors.
Here's a local error.
Do you have any hobbies or interests?
Not really, not so much, but I like taking a photo.
Even though the learner has clearly made an error, their intended meaning is clear. This is known as a local error.
How did you become interested in photography?
Because London's weather is not good and overcast. So, but now I realize that it is biased.
Here, we do not understand what the learner has intended to convey. This is known as a global error. So global errors have a much more serious effect on understanding, and local errors don't, but we do notice them.
Stai trovando questo video utile e interessante? Lascia un mi piace qui sotto.
Some other areas we might consider are whether the error is in fact a mistake or a slip, and also if the error is what is known as a treatable error or an untreatable error.
Here the learner says taking a photo, and they should say taking photos. If the learner can self-correct this error, then it is a slip. Slips do not need lengthy correction. If the learner cannot self-correct the error when prompted, and others are also unable to do so, then this is most likely a mistake. Mistakes require longer to remedy. This first example can be treated with a rule that explains the reason for the error. In this second example, the learner has used the correct grammar, but has made a collocation error. So providing them with the correct verb choice is useful, but we are unable to explain to them why they should choose that verb. And so this is known as an untreatable error, because we cannot give them a rule to explain the correct usage. So we can see how this distinction is useful for us as teachers. A treatable error can be corrected, and a rule can be explained, provided, and explored. An untreatable error can also be corrected, but will take much less time because there is nothing to explore other than knowing the correct form and trying to remember it and use it next time. And so many grammar mistakes are treatable, and many lexical mistakes are untreatable. And this influences when we might deliver the feedback. For example, we know that a treatable error will take longer to explore, so perhaps correcting a learner while they're speaking is not the best time to do that. Whereas if a learner has made a small mistake with a lexical choice, you could provide immediate feedback and the learner could then continue talking and it would not disrupt the flow. So it would seem that a global error, where the intended meaning is lost, is much more serious and therefore requires immediate attention from the teacher. But remember, they also take longer to remedy. And so in a monolingual classroom, perhaps asking the learner what they intended to say in their mother tongue might be the best compromise here. Local errors are not as serious in the short term, but this does not mean that they do not need attention. A repeated local error that goes uncorrected could become fossilized. However, the need for an immediate correction is less, and so the teacher has a choice. They can either provide an immediate, quick correction, or they could wait until the communication has finished and the learner is ready to turn their attention to the correction.
So now you've seen a few examples. Do you feel that you give more feedback on global or local errors? And do you differ your technique depending on whether you feel it is a treatable error or an untreatable error? Now we'll consider some different errors and how we might correct them. And I think it's important to note the difference between direct correction, which is very explicit and the learner knows what's happening and the fact that they're being corrected, and the alternative, which is called an indirect correction. And this is where the teacher provides some feedback, but the learner may not know that this is what is happening. Let's take a look at some examples and let's consider which approach to feedback best suits whether the error is global or local and whether it's treatable or untreatable.
Stai trovando questo video utile e interessante? Lascia un mi piace qui sotto.
Let's look at 3 teacher responses to this local error. Number 1 is known as echoing, and sounds like this. Oh, you like making photos. This is often ineffective because the learner is unaware, perhaps, that they are being corrected. And the same problem is true of number 2. You like taking photos. Because a learner might not notice the change in form, they might think simply that you're responding to the content of what they're saying. So when we think about it, we can see that this is actually not very effective. But evidence-based classroom research shows us that this is in fact the most popular and favoured feedback technique among many teachers. So why is this? And I think it comes back to what we said at the start of the video. Many teachers are simply worried that they will upset, offend, or knock the confidence of their learners through correction, and so they instinctively choose an implicit technique rather than an explicit one. Example number 3 is the most effective form of implicit feedback, and it's called a stressed recast, and it sounds like this. You like taking photos. You see that the teacher has stressed the lexical change, take instead of make, and the teacher is using a questioning intonation to also mark the fact that there was a potential error somewhere in that utterance. When comparing different types of feedback, studies have proven that explicit feedback is more successful. And the great thing about explicit feedback is that it works with both immediate and delayed correction. And you can use them when correcting slips and developmental errors or mistakes, and also with L1 interference issues. Let's look at some examples. So option 1, you can provide direct correction. For example, you should say taking photos, not making photos. Option number 2 is more guided and is known as elicitation. So you would say, you like photos, and see if they can notice and then provide the correct form. When doing elicitation in immediate feedback, some teachers use their fingers to indicate where the gap is. Other teachers, if doing feedback in a delayed fashion, would write the sentence on the board and provide the gap. Either way, the learner is invited to notice the error and attempt a self-correction. Number 3. Is making correct? That's known as questioning. Again, you're alerting the learner to the area where the error is. So you're explicit in saying the verb make is wrong. Is making correct here? Option number 4. You need a different verb here, not make. Can you give me a different verb? And so you're using those grammar words there in your prompt. Notice that number 1 is an explanation provided by the teacher, and therefore it is a one-way interaction. In examples 2, 3, and 4, the teacher is guiding, nudging, prompting the learner towards self-correction, rather than directly telling them. So this is a two-way interaction, and the technical term for this guidance and support is scaffolding. Option 5 involves not entering into any kind of interaction with the learner, and simply waiting until the speaking is over. And this is one of my preferred techniques, using the board at the end of the activity to provide some corrective feedback. This is known as delayed language feedback. There are many benefits to this technique. The first one is attention. Because learners have finished saying what they wanted to say, they can turn their attention to how well they've expressed their intended meaning. Secondly, because the language is on the board, you're providing a written form, and therefore learners are more likely to see error. And finally, because it's delayed and the language is on the board, it is less obvious who made the error. Let's look at an example. So first, you've written down the mistakes during the speaking task. Record them on the board along with some examples of good language that you heard during the speaking activity. In teams, learners discuss which ones are correct and incorrect. The balance also helps with motivation here, but it provides challenge too. Learners correct the wrong ones in a team, and then they finally check with you. You can provide rules for the treatable errors and simply provide correct alternatives for the untreatable errors. Note that all the errors you see here on this board are treatable except for number 2. The verb pattern that follows want and the choice of open versus start a business have no learnable rule, so they just need to be noticed and memorized.
We also know that there's a lot of affective areas we need to consider. So affect, describing the learner's feelings and emotions. Perhaps one technique isn't better than another. More important is how we make a learner feel about the error. And we've looked at some arguments that suggest that when the learner feels that they are free to make a mistake and learn from the mistake, then we might see more progress. So, how can we make correction more fun? How can we gamify it? How can we create an environment of excited exploration rather than correct, incorrect, good, bad, right, wrong? Let's take a look now.
Here learners are put into teams and they're given a budget of £100. They have to gamble whether they think the sentence is correct or not, and they can earn extra money for correcting the errors. They lose the money if they're wrong. The team at the end with the most money wins. An alternative is to put learners into 2 large teams. One member of each team steps forward. The teacher reads a sentence and they have to rush to the board and hit the correct circle, whether it's correct or incorrect. This can get quite noisy and chaotic, but it adds a sense of excitement and changes the pace of a lesson. Here the teacher reads a sentence and the learners move depending on whether they think there is an error or not. They have to say which city the teacher is visiting. So if there is an error, they move to the left and up, and if it's correct, they move to the right and up. Let's try. I'm interested in fashion. I felt very boring. I want open my business. So if you've played right, you should be in Manchester.
So thank you for taking the time to reflect on your teaching practice and consider how and when we provide corrective feedback to our learners. I'll leave you now with a list of key points from the session and also a list of the books that I referred to when preparing for this. I think these are all great places to go if you want to refresh your understanding and find new practical ideas to use in your classrooms.